Hello and welcome to Ascending Order with me, Basil Valentine. Today, Wednesday, the 17th of September, 2025. Lots to get through today, starting with Donald Trump, who is back in Britain for an unprecedented second state visit. He's been at Windsor Castle this morning. He arrived by helicopter. I think they bring the helicopter from the United States, believe it or not, something like that. And I've just seen pictures of the pomp and ceremony. Trump and Melania, both of whom are taller than Charles and Camilla, standing on a red carpeted dais, a sort of glorified gazebo, really, with a rather desultory looking palm plant for decoration. And they were stood there about 10 or 12 inches off the ground, watching a sort of mini version of the Trooping of the Colour with the cavalry, household cavalry, it looked like, and then one or two guards regiments all marching past in solemnity. I think, I'm sure I'm not the only one, in fact, who finds the appearance of some of the sort of King's Own divisions rather extraordinary in the third decade of the 21st century. The uniforms really are quite splendid. They sort of hark back 200 years at least to the days of empire. No doubt Donald Trump is impressed by all this. He loves opulence and luxury, doesn't he? And I've no doubt it's one of the reasons why he ran in the first place, was precisely for this kind of ego massage. The choreography, of course, of these things is always very careful. The Prince and Princess of Wales were stood just outside the principal gazebo to the side, and then another whole clutch of dignitaries in the doorway of one of the buildings. The whole thing taking place within the grounds of Windsor Castle. Extraordinarily, there is no public occasion during this state visit. Usually there's a carriage ride, perhaps a church service, something where the people get to see not only their monarch, but the visiting dignitary. None of it this time, of course, and we all know why, because the streets would doubtless be festooned with demonstrators protesting against not only Trump, but quite possibly King Charles III as well. Well, the demonstrators got their moment in the sun, or rather the moonlight, last night by projecting extremely embarrassing images of Donald Trump and his big pal Jeffrey Epstein all over the walls of Windsor Castle, as we can see now. All rather hilarious, if you ask me. And they went on to project Prince Andrew, those famous pictures of him and Jeff Epstein wearing almost identical coats, taking a stroll in Central Park a few years ago. Pictures that will no doubt haunt Prince Andrew all the way to the grave. Really deeply humiliating for the President of the United States and the King's brother, for that matter, to have their images projected onto the walls of Windsor Castle alongside the world's most notorious pedophile. 4 people have been arrested under the Malicious Communications Act in connection with that little stunt, which I must admit I find particularly amusing. I hope you do too. Now on to the serious stuff, and of course there's always a lot of it. In the second half of the program today, I will be joined by Dr.Rehiana Ali, consultant neurologist who has found herself suspended for wrongthink. Tommy Robinson drew hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets of London to protest for freedom of speech. But I don't think he had Dr. Ali in mind. We either believe in freedom of speech or we don't. Dr. Ali has been suspended for objecting to genocide. Yes, the usual mob have piled on her. We'll be hearing from her directly, and also listening to extracts from her speech at the What Future for Palestine event in Birmingham at the weekend. What future for Palestine indeed? That's the question of the day. It remains the big question of the day. Mehdi Hassan, formerly of MSNBC, spoke to two of the key representatives from the United Nations, who yesterday, of course, published the reports of the Commission, 79-page report, really exhaustive, irrefutable evidence that Israel is indeed perpetrating genocide in Gaza.
Israel is indeed committing a genocide, and that you had to say so in an official report?
That immediately reminded me of the Rwanda genocide, where I was a judge.
The inescapability of the slaughter, of the starvation. There is nowhere safe. There is nowhere to be evacuated to.
Even toddlers were shot right in the head by Israeli snipers as they were traveling on those routes.
It was systematic. It was directed towards humiliation of the victims that indicated an intention to destroy the sense of identity.
Doesn't the Genocide Convention say that other countries have to therefore step in to stop the genocide?
Yes, you're quite right here. It's not a choice, it's an obligation that states have to under the genocide, and they all are parties to that.
If Israel gets a lot of attention, it's because there is no other situation on the planet where the UN has been so intimately involved from the beginning in the circumstances that have given rise to and perpetuate the current crisis. So it has no choice but to be involved. Netanyahu, like everything he says, is simply lying.
One is occupy and the other is occupied. They are not equal.
They certainly are not equal. All those troops in the fancy uniforms marching up and down inside Windsor Castle, under the terms of the Geneva Convention on Genocide, they should be on the flotilla right now, heading to Gaza to do something to prevent genocide. But of course, nothing at all is happening. Ed Davey is the leader of the Liberal Democrats at the moment. He was invited to the gala dinner tonight, the state banquet. He won't be going, and he explained why on
Well, now we've seen this UN report. We've been looking at the International Association of Genocidal Scholars. We've been looking at Israeli organisation like B'Tselem. They have all said there's a genocide, and I say with them, there is a genocide. And I think, given President Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize, he should stop it. He can stop it. And one of the reasons I'm not going to the banquet tonight is not only I wouldn't get a chance to speak to President Trump, that's not how they work, but I wanted the media discussions over his state visit to focus on the fact that he has the power to stop it. He could ring up Netanyahu and demand a ceasefire, demand that the food gets in to those innocent Palestinians, and he could ring up the Qatari government and other Gulf states so they'll put pressure on Hamas to release the hostages. He is a very powerful man. He's choosing not to use that power, and when a genocide is happening, that is quite appalling.
Sorry, I'm struggle to believe anybody's still talking about the hostages. The Israelis have had innumerable opportunities to take back the hostages. Only yesterday, Hamas offered to release all the hostage in exchange for safe passage out of Gaza to a neutral third country. That offer was rejected. Meanwhile, Britain, of course, continues to cooperate diplomatically, militarily, and in every other way with the genocide heirs. Jeremy Corbyn was a very weak leader of the Labour Party. He had the opportunity to do something about this. Instead, he threw various colleagues under the bus in the entirely phony anti-Semitism scandal. But at least he's one of the few people standing up in the House of Commons to attempt at least to call this awful government to account.
Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to raise a point of order, which I've sent notice of you too. Have you had an indication from the Foreign Secretary that they're either going to come to this House today or they're going to make a statement concerning the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry report into the occupied Palestinian territories, where they have confirmed in detail, horrifying detail, the acts of genocide that are now being committed by Israeli forces against the Palestinian people, against children, destroying hospitals, destroying schools, and destroying life itself? This is a serious matter, and if we're to continue normal relations with Israel, I think the Foreign Office needs to explain why we're having those relations with a country that is committing acts of genocide against the Palestinian people.
Thank you for the point of order. I've had no indication that ministers intend to come to the House to make a statement on this matter. But he certainly put the point on the record. What I would say is, I know many other members are concerned. I will look to the government to bring a statement on the immediate return to the House. If not, I am quite sure that others will be looking to have a UQ placed before me on our return. Let's have a Roberts.
Bring a statement. My goodness, I can hardly wait. There's no sense of urgency, certainly where the British government is concerned, to bring the slaughter to an end. Out of sight, out of mind. Well, it's not entirely out of sight because it's been live streamed on social media, even if we don't get to see the horrors on the BBC and in the rest of the corporate media. So I make no apology now for showing just a couple of examples of the horror in Gaza every day. First of all, a family fleeing with this situation now, just to bring people up to date, where the genocide forces have ordered everybody to leave Gaza City so that they can demolish it completely and then kill them as they leave. So we're heading into the final stages of this genocide. I'm keeping a close eye on the two Christian communities, Catholic and Orthodox, who have vowed to stay in Gaza City while it is being erased. But here's what happens to you if you try and flee.
حسبي الله حسبي الله الأطفال يا الله يا الله يا الله شهداء يا الله شهداء امرأة وأطفال نازحين ناس نازحين يا الله يا الله نازحين يا الله الشهداء.
The aftermath of a rocket attack on a family vehicle attempting to leave Gaza City. These two individuals were simply walking down the road. I think it's safe to say that's murdered in cold blood. Well, it's appalling that governments are not acting, but the International Subud Global Flotilla is acting. An unarmed convoy of vessels heading towards the Gaza Strip to bring much needed humanitarian assistance, not a military intervention, although the Israelis are attempting to portray it not just as a military intervention, but a terrorist one. My good friend, Dr. Frank Ramado, is aboard one of the vessels heading towards Gaza, currently in the central Mediterranean near Malta, continuing to head east. And he has just filed this report from on board. You won't find this anywhere else.
They're on the Spectre, a book of the Global Samud Flotilla. We are arriving soon in international waters, which means hopefully we arrive soon in international waters. It means that we will have won the bureaucratic warfare, and then there will be other challenges ahead. But for now, the challenge is to leave North African waters, which means that we'd be free and independent from local authorities and politics that could hold up the flotilla. So it won't be long now that we can say on entering international waters we have won the bureaucratic warfare. which is probably the most difficult part of the trip, even though we, of course, have the challenge when we arrive to Gaza. So many times, the Freedom Flotilla boats and now some mud boats, we had some problems as well, were held up in port, and we could not even leave port. So that is the initial and probably the most important step in the entire flotilla, is to be able to leave port with our crew, with our captain, and with the participants working together to showcase the struggle of the Gazan people, the Gazan Palestinians who are there, subject to a genocide. As you know, it's almost unbelievable that the world continues to close its eyes in the middle of this genocide, and the Gazan Palestinians really think, and I'm in touch with many from Khan Yunis, from Rafah, from Gaza City, and they all tell me, where is everyone? Where is the world? They feel abandoned, and this gesture of trying to arrive there, taking exceptional risks with people who have a lot to lose, is a gesture showing that the Palestinian Gazans that we are not giving up, that we are in solidarity with them, that we are willing to take the risks to showcase their struggle to the world and hopefully inspire other activists to follow. You can come to follow and have massive numbers of boats by sea, by land, and surround Israel to do the right thing, to stop the genocide and to allow the Palestinian people to have a normal life, to have a country which they so deserve, as opposed to being subjugated and persecuted by the Israelis that are backed up by the United States, which is an accomplice to the Israeli war crimes by enabling this genocide, by sending arms and support and money and political support to Israel, is under international law, the Geneva Convention and other laws, complete accomplice to this war crime, so that the United States, leaders of the United States, will eventually be prosecuted as war criminals and will be issued arrest warrants, I'm sure, in the near future. And hopefully these criminals, such as American presidents, such as Obama's one, Trump is another, Biden's another, in which, when they were at the head of state in the United States, there was always within each administration a conflict in Gaza, and in each conflict, these United States presidents that I've mentioned have contributed, aided and abetted the massacre of innocent Palestinians, notably in Gaza, which means that they are also war criminals, and that they will end up paying a high price eventually after receiving their arrest warrants, and hopefully they'll make a mistake and leave their countries into and travel even over a country that complies with the ICC decisions, will be forced to land. Those leaders will be, or former leaders, will be taken to The Hague and prosecuted as war criminals, and that's what they deserve, to show the world that the heads of state, that no one can get away of committing serious war crimes, especially genocide. Thank you.
Who's, as you can see there, on his way to Gaza right now. He's absolutely right, of course. There's no reason why heads of state should escape prosecution. Donald Trump prancing around at Windsor Castle, what an appalling spectacle. Why are those soldiers that he was inspecting today not on their way to Gaza themselves? A quick pivot now to a parallel story, really, of course, because the Charlie Kirk assassination is increasingly being linked to the genocidaires, because Charlie was changing his opinions about Israel. He'd been bribed and then found himself increasingly browbeaten and even blackmailed into continuing his support for Israel. We'll come to that in a moment. But first of all, more and more questions are being asked about the immediate circumstances of the assassination. The FBI story doesn't add up. They've released these text messages which look as if they've been written by an FBI staffer. The language that's used, the punctuation, none of it seems to fit. We'll have a look at that in a moment with Candace Owens. Furthermore, they've also erased the crime scene. It's already been paved over, apparently. George Webb, the internet investigative journalist, has been to Utah University and examined the scene for himself.
Okay, here's kind of the angle here at Losey Center, there at the Student Union, kind of coming from this way, shooting downward angle. I just talked to these gentlemen who were here at that time. They said really hard to place the shot. It was banging around. But you can see here that there is some approaches up there. There was a video out there that showed a flash, so we don't have all that data. But interesting how it's been sort of concreted over, and you know, we're having a lot of improvements. It kind of reminds me of the Canfield 4 in a way. But walking back this way, it just seems a lot farther than on television. On TV, that's a real close shot where that first guy is on that first stair. It's a real close shot. And Charlie going from the left to the right would also go along with that. If you go up here to the Losey Center, it's all the way over there. I mean, that's a much longer shot than I guess a much longer shot than I thought of when I saw it on television. So that's the report here from UVU. The other thing that everyone's ignoring is, how did he get the gun? If there was people who were on the Discord with him trying to get him the gun, to pick up the gun, that's called a gun drop. That's really super critical information. They left that totally out of today's, left that totally out. Plus, if there's a spent chamber, if there's a spent bullet in the chamber, how did it get back in the magazine? How did he disassemble the gun without a screwdriver? All these questions. So we got a lot of questions to answer yet as we roll forward here in at UVU, Utah Valley University.
Even commentators like Michael Savage are questioning the official version of events. It begins to look as if there might well have been a second shooter, as was the case with the Kennedy assassination. In that case, of course, the man subsequently assassinated for not shooting the president, Lee Harvey Oswald. There's a photograph of him standing in the doorway of the Texas School Book Depository as the motorcade passes. There's no way he could have inflicted the wounds he did on President Kennedy with the gun that he's claimed to have had and in the position he's supposed to have taken up. So basically, somebody else shot Kennedy. Looks like somebody else shot Charlie Kirk as well, as we can hear now from InfoWars. Okay, we can't. Sorry, technical glitch there. Bear with me. Okay, not getting that report. I'll try and get that for you tomorrow. Here we go. I think we might have it rolling this time. No, the gremlins seem determined to prevent me from playing that report, which basically says that there's a flash appears from elsewhere simultaneously with the shot that's supposed to have killed him from miles away by the amateur marksman with a gun that he dismantled in 2 seconds flat with no tools, even though it would take a skilled gunsmith 15 minutes with the complete set of tools to dismantle that gun, and then jumped off with it, half of it stuffed down his trousers, and then apparently he reassembled it in a woodland somewhere, even though there are no woods anywhere near. We can't have that story, but fortunately we can at least catch up with Tucker Carlson and Max Blumenthal, both of whom have been doing some digging around into Charlie Kirk's immediate state of mind and the circumstances of those pressuring to keep up his support for Israel.
Following my September 12th report, which provided background about the pressure, the mounting pressure that Charlie Kirk was under from pro-Israel forces, from Netanyahu's cutouts in the United States, I gathered more details. The piece, it hit like a sledgehammer. It really caused a lot of, I think it spoke for a lot of people, particularly within the conservative movement, which is changing among the youth on the question of Israel. And more people started coming out, and more people started talking, and people were talking to me. And these were people who had knowledge of a tumultuous, stormy meeting held in the Hamptons during the first week of August, convened, according to multiple sources, with knowledge of this meeting, intimate knowledge of this meeting, by the billionaire ultra-Zionist financier Bill Ackman, who's close to Netanyahu and his kind of network in the United States. Charlie Kirk was summoned along with an array of young, sort of vapid, very avaricious conservative influencers who seem to be sort of in Israel's back pocket to set a very pro-Israel tone for this meeting. And Charlie Kirk was, according to one source, hammered by Ackman and others for allowing Israel critics, very prominent conservative voices like Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, or the anti-Zionist Jewish comedian Dave Smith, to appear at his events. And actually, Charlie Kirk was planning to host many of these same figures again in December, and he had just added to his TPUSA major, I think it's called America Fest in December, the premier critic of Israel in Congress. I didn't say Republican critic, I just said premier critic, because that's what she is now, Marjorie Taylor Greene, which really reflected his shifting views. And Ackman, according to multiple sources, had this meeting to basically bully Charlie Kirk into submission. Charlie Kirk walked away, according to one person, feeling like there was an attempt to blackmail him. He refused any offers of funding and also refused the offer to travel to Israel and meet with Netanyahu, which Netanyahu disclosed in the wake, the immediate wake of Netanyahu's death. He talked about this letter, but he didn't say whether Charlie Kirk refused or accepted. I've learned since that he refused.
Tucker Carlson is one of the people that was identified by Bill Ackman and his cohorts as unacceptable on the stage at Turning Point USA, even though Tucker, of course, is one of the most prominent conservative voices in America. He's been speaking yesterday about how Charlie encouraged him to say whatever he wanted. Charlie was, of course, a fierce defender of freedom of speech, absolutism, even if, in this case, it cost him not only some donors, but also possibly his life.
Before that speech that I gave in July, we had a conversation about this backstage right before I went on. And I was fulminating and getting all red in the face like I often do, to my shame. And I was mad thinking about this and thinking about the effort by the neocons in the United States to draw us in to another forever war with Iran. Not a defense of Iran, of course. It's merely an acknowledgement that we've done this before. This happened in Iraq, which we entered into at the behest of those same foreign policy strategists, and it didn't work. And so I was going on at some length backstage with Charlie, and I said, probably not going to talk about that. I'm not going to torture you. I know your donors hate this when I say that. And also Epstein was in the news, and it was clear to me that, Epstein's probably not like a Mossad agent or something, but Epstein clearly had contact with Israeli intelligence and American intelligence and French intelligence, but the only one you're not allowed to talk about is Israeli intelligence. But it seemed true to me, and I had done some work on that, and I knew a bunch of people pretty close to that story. So I thought that. And I said that to Charlie, and I said, but I'm not going to say that because I don't want to make your donors mad. I know it's just going to be like an endless flurry of text telling you to stop or you're going to lose a bunch of funding. And he looked at me, I'll never forget it, and said, go all the way. Do it. Go all the way. I said, man, a lot of things I can talk about. I don't need to talk about that. And he said, do it. So I did it. By the way, I think that conversation, he had a mic on, and so did I. It probably exists somewhere on somebody's server, but that's, I think, a faithful rendition of what he said. And by the way, I'm not trying to blame him for my remarks. You can agree or disagree with those remarks, but I'm saying this only because I was shocked and sickened by the reaction of the ghoulish and really repulsive reaction of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, to Charlie's death. Basically made it all about him and all about his country, immediately trying to take the energy, the sadness, the grief that people felt over Charlie's murder and redirect it towards support for whatever project he's involved in.
Who would have guessed that Netanyahu would try and hijack Charlie's death and enshrine him as some kind of martyr for Israel? Turns out Charlie was no fan of Netanyahu. Who would be, for Christ's sake? The man's a gangster and a homicidal maniac. Tucker reiterated this point as well.
He did not like Bibi Netanyahu, and he said that to me many times, and he said it to people around him many times. He felt that Bibi Netanyahu was a very destructive force. He was appalled by what was happening in Gaza. He was, above all, resentful that he believed Netanyahu was using the United States to prosecute his wars for the benefit of his country, and that it was shameful and embarrassing and bad for the United States, and he resented it. Didn't hate Netanyahu. He wasn't out there with a placard saying that, but he certainly expressed that to me and a lot of other people. And there's no question that Bibi's defenders on the internet will call me a liar or a kook, but that's a fact. And enough text messages exist that I think it can probably be verified in pretty short order. Not that it needs to be, because that is true. Shortly after that speech, there was a very intense attack on Charlie, and to some extent on me, not that I really noticed. But on him, I have no donors. He had $100 million worth of donors. And so, because he was involved in a different project from just yapping on the internet, which is what I do for a living, he was dependent to a great extent on his donors, of course. It's a nonprofit. And they went after him and tormented him. Not all, of course. Many were supportive, but the ones who were offended by my speech, and there was a small, very intense group who were, tormented Charlie Kirk until the day he died.
Tormented Charlie Kirk until the day he died. Very strong language indeed from Tucker there. Somebody else who is being tormented by essentially the same forces is the consultant neurologist Dr. Rehiana Ali, who joins me on Ascending Order here on Unprecedented TV now. Great that you can be with us today, Rehiana.
So thanks for having me, actually, Basil. I appreciate it.
Not at all. So I shouldn't imagine you were necessarily a huge fan of Charlie Kirk. I wasn't either, and I wasn't aware of the full extent of his spiritual journey, as it's been described by Candace Owens, away from unequivocal support for Zionism, although he said some absolutely appalling, reprehensible things about the Palestinians since the genocide began. Nevertheless, as Tucker Carlson said there, he was tormented by the Zionists he was trying to break away from until the day he died. They act in a mafia-like way. Benjamin Netanyahu offered him $150 million, apparently, and a propaganda tour of Israel in order to get him to stay on the reservation, something he refused. You too, in a different way, have been a victim of much the same kind of bullying, have you not? Do please tell our viewers and listeners your story.
Thank you. So I've never been offered $150 million, but I don't have the profile of Charlie Kirk. But I think, again, I think that so just to comment on Charlie Kirk. So obviously, yes, I was no fan of Charlie Kirk. But that doesn't mean that I would ever celebrate his death, because it was horrific, and I think in front of his children. But I think he was on a journey. I think those conversations. I think that what's coming to light is that he would have become an immense danger to Israel because he had a Christian Zionist bloc, and that's now the bloc that's effectively supporting Israel. And I think what Tucker doesn't really allude to is that the mob is, I mean, I think we have to say it. I mean, the mob is, yes, it's pro-Israeli, but it's a Jewish mob. You know, that's the character of it. The people wanting support for Israel are Jewish. And that doesn't mean that I hate every Jewish person. I mean, I was targeted, and this is the point that I made in the High Court and to my tribunal. So just to go back a little bit and rewind, is that I couldn't stay quiet when, you know, Hamas broke that illegal 17-year siege in Gaza. I was pretty active on Twitter, X, the X platform, and initially I was targeted by Nasha Jew. You know, it's a particularly vitriolic organization. The identity of all its members are not quite known, but some are like David Collier, though he now disputes it. There's someone called Arnott again. You know, Simon Meyerson, who's a KC, says that he's not a member, and he would sue if one continued to email him. I mean, there was one email, so he claims harassment. But they issued this article about me and my sister, complained via the Lawyers for Israel. So it's a coordinated effort. So Nasha Jew collates the data, collates the tweets. Lawyers for Israel then write a letter to the General Medical Council, our regulatory body. And initially, the General Medical Council dismissed it, said it didn't meet the threshold for investigation. And obviously, because of what was happening and also my personal circumstances of seeing how bad the MPs in Bradford were, I stood for the parliamentary elections. And that then started the Jewish Medical Association off. So they complained twice to the General Medical Council about me, saying my election flyer that, you know, effectively, you know, it's looked at by the Electoral Commission, you know, was anti-Semitic, reported me twice. GMC decides that it's not going to, it doesn't meet the threshold of any investigation, obviously, because there's no anti-Jewish hatred in it. I then get, and then obviously, you know, Wes Streeting, unfortunately, becomes health secretary. Now, Wes Streeting was called by I think it was one of the Jewish groups. They called him our friend, you know, at the National Union of Students, which he headed. And he made it very clear that the General Medical Council wasn't doing enough about, you know, doctors and other healthcare workers like me who were speaking out against the genocide, which he obviously claimed were being anti-Semitic, you know, which is a nonsense of a term anyway. And then obviously things changed. So General Medical Council then received another complaint, this time from an anonymous doctor. In my case, at the same time, that doctor had communicated with the Community Security Trust. And then there was clearly, I felt this was coordinated. I felt this doctor was clearly linked to the Jewish Medical Association, who had complained before, but now they were using an individual doctor. Then the next thing that happens is that the campaign against anti-Semitism get involved. The General Medical Council have dismissed similar complaints, but now they decide to investigate. And then before I know it, I'm told that I'm going to be taken to a tribunal, an interim orders tribunal. This is obviously before any investigation starts. And I couldn't make those dates because I had clinics, had clinic commitments. And I made the very reasonable request that it just be delayed by what in effect would have been 11 working days. And I gave them a date in January. They wouldn't postpone that hearing. I got suspended in my absence whilst I was in clinic, treating British patients. And when I learned about that suspension, I had to cancel all my subsequent clinics. I think that was approximately 200 patients that would have been cancelled and rescheduled. And I could not get anywhere with the General Medical Council. I contacted my indemnity body, and they were pretty useless. Initially, they said ask for an early review with the General Medical Council. So we did that. My indemnity body caused delays. When we asked for an early review, they rejected it within a couple of days. And so I didn't really have any choice. And then my indemnity body was effectively saying, stay suspended until your next hearing. So the GMC is obliged to give you a hearing every 6 months legally, because I've been suspended for 18 months. And I was furious. So I had to do the High Court application myself with my sister, who's a banking lawyer by background, who hasn't worked obviously in the legal field for many years due to blacklisting. But we put on. Obviously, I took the GMC to court. I got a hearing date for the 10th of July. In the interim, I had my tribunal hearing on the 16th of July. It was initially meant to be on the 16th of June, sorry, and then it got deferred to the 14th of July because I didn't allocate enough time for the hearing. And my suspension was revoked. But, I represented myself because, my issue was that, number one, I just found that lawyers weren't willing to speak up. They weren't willing to go up against the lobby. They weren't willing to defend what I said, which was perfectly legal and legitimate. And my suspension was revoked, and obviously there was uproar from the Jewish pro-Israeli lobbies. The very next day after my suspension was revoked, Wes Streeting came out and made those remarks, very worrying remarks about, well, the GMC is failing, the Jewish community, and essentially he should think about changing the legislation because it wouldn't cost him any money and it would be very easy to do. So basically, he was planning to bypass the regulator that was already biased against people like me and anyone basically speaking up against the genocide. But this decision to revoke the suspension wasn't taken by the GMC. They were arguing to keep my 18-month suspension. It was taken by allegedly an independent panel of 3 members who had to listen to the GMC submission, had to listen to my submission and make a decision. And really, there's just been, abuse after abuse of proceedings. And we can go into that. And I suppose the final point to make is that I had gone to the High Court. So the High Court had been a few days earlier, and the judge had chosen not to make a judgment immediately or give direction to the panel. She said she would make a judgment early next week. That would have made that the 14th or 15th of July. And I found out just over a month ago that she's effectively refusing to give a judgment for a hearing. And that's something I'm chasing at the moment because I think it's, it's outrageous that you can have a hearing. I can speak for 3.5 hours. I can talk about my suspension. It's not just about the revocation of my suspension. It's actually about the legality of my suspension. It's about all the abuse of process. It's about the involvement of, Wes Streeting. It's about the political persecution of me. And none of those grounds of appeal, of which there were 9, and the infringement of my rights to speak, she hasn't addressed a single one. So that's the justice system so far.
It does sound pretty appalling, Rehiana. And you're not the only one, are you? There's also Dr. Remy Aladwan. Various other physicians in the health service have been attacked, suspended, in some cases sacked even, for opposing genocide by genocide defenders who then retreat behind the Jewish identity. That's sort of the key point. When they're on the attack, then they're Zionists, but then whenever you point out the evils of Zionism, it was only yesterday that the United Nations, an exhaustive report, declared that Israel is committing genocide. Whenever you point that out, then they retreat to a position of, oh, we are simply innocent Jewish people.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's a defense, and it's to make everyone immediately try and back off, feel guilty. Oh gosh, I'm being labelled an anti-Semite, and I've personally got to the point I really don't care. I don't care about the labels. I think this is one of the reasons why the genocide, the Holocaust in Palestine has continued. People have been so scared to call out the Jewish lobby, and because they've been terrified that you could, I mean, look what's happening. I mean, I got suspended for 7 months without pay because I had been locuming. I had no job security. My good friend, she's a new friend, but a good friend, Dr. Ellen Creasel, she's been a consultant pediatrician at Whittington Hospital, which is a complete cesspit. I think it's worth just mentioning this case because she went to a protest on Saturday. By Sunday, she's been doxxed by Nasher Jew. By Monday, she's heard from her trust. And by Thursday, there are over 1,400 complaints against her. I mean, this is a mob, this is a mafia. And she is suspended by the trust. And the chair of that trust, Julia Neuberger, who also heads the, I think she's deputy lead of the Jewish Leadership Council, the very council that was involved in trying to block me and Dr. Aladwan from speaking at a Leeds protest just basically about a month ago. So they were contacting the MPs, Fabian Hamilton, a Jewish MP in Leeds. They were contacting the police, the deputy mayor, the mayor, that myself and Rahme, both UK citizens, shouldn't be speaking in the town. So, this is a complete abuse of power. That's what it is, actually. And then we're told that they have no power. And if you say the Jewish lobby has power, then you're an anti-Semite. And but whilst we're getting suspended and sacked, it's actually outrageous that this can actually happen to anyone and they can wreck your life. But if you say, well, actually you do have power, you've just got me sacked or you've got me suspended, then it's like, well, actually that's another anti-Semitic trope. It's just a constant, and I think it's failing for people, but it's not failing quick enough. And I think that's why it's important to actually say, well, actually start looking at the facts. I mean, that's where I am based. That doesn't mean that every Jewish person is bad, but it means that actually we need to start looking at who does control the reins of power in this country. Why is it that 25% of our MPs are funded by the Israeli lobby? Why is it that actually there is overrepresentation? Now, if that was Muslims, if there was an overrepresentation of Muslims, actually there's an underrepresentation, and if there was an overrepresentation, everyone would be speaking about it. Right now, for example, in Parliament, a question is asked. I can't remember the name of the non-entity of an MP who asked the question, saying, "Oh well, what about these Sharia courts?" I mean, they're not courts; they're kind of advisory councils. But at the same time, she doesn't mention the Beth Din. That she doesn't mention the fact that why is it that nobody knows in this country, or very few people know in this country, there's actually even a kind of a police force, if you like, the Shomrim, in areas in Jewish communities, for example, in North London and in Manchester. I mean, did you know? I mean, I didn't know that I didn't know that until recently. Why is it that actually there's an ambulance service called, I think it's a Hatzalah? Why is that present for Jewish people? Who's funding it, and why are they, and why they've got maternity services purely for Jewish patients? Where's the money coming from? And if it's publicly funded, then why? Because actually there shouldn't be separate services for different groups, and I would argue that for Muslim, there shouldn't be separate organizations, particularly on things that are publicly funded for Muslims or Jews or any other community.
Crucially, of course, some of these organizations like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and the so-called Community Securities Trusts have direct links with the Israeli embassy. So again, we get this sort of front for the general public, or we're sort of called completely innocent and harmless and just looking to defend the interests of honest-to-God Jewish people. But in fact, they're representing a foreign country, and what's more, a foreign country committing genocide. Nobody has been on the case of this more than Professor David Miller, formerly of Bristol University. And he pointed out in a recent piece to camera how the UK security services have been keen to drive a wedge between Muslim communities in Britain and the anti-war left, as we can hear now.
The idea is to try and destroy the possibility of white people and non-white people coming together to oppose UK foreign policy. The reason that they wanted to do that was, of course, they saw that there was a unity in 2002, 3 and 4 between aspects of the conscious Muslim community and the left and the anti-war movement, and that frightened elements of British intelligence. So this whole effort has been to try and split that asunder and to make it clear that, first of all, Muslims shouldn't support the anti-war movement. They shouldn't oppose Western wars. They should adorn themselves with the Union flag. Part of the effort, therefore, was to say that there are these good Muslims who are the community groups working with them, although they didn't say they were with them. And there are these bad Muslims, the Muslims who are conscious and who are saying, we don't want to kill 1 million Iraqis. We don't want to participate in the genocide in Palestine. They tried to smear them as being extremists, as being what they were called jihadis, etc. Now, of course, this is at the same time, exactly the same time as actually the British government was supporting Al-Qaeda and similar groups in Syria. We've seen, of course, the effects of that in the coming to power of the Gilani government in Syria in recent months. There's a deep malaise inside the intelligence services, such that they are both, on the one hand, supporting people they call extremists, on the other hand, smearing honest Muslims who oppose Western government policy as being extremists, and thirdly, trying to wrap some elements of the Muslim community in the Union flag. And I think that's a profoundly mistaken approach.
Eloquent and accurate as always there, David Miller. So, Rehiana, you've sort of found yourself drawn into the Palestinian cause from humanitarian principles, opposition to genocide, which is a word we've used so much in the last 18 months or so that I think its impact is sadly being diminished. This is the ultimate crime. This is mass murder on an industrial scale. There is no crime against humanity worse than genocide. Of course, we've still got bands of genocide deniers, including, because this all ties back into Charlie Kirk, including this woman, Natasha Hausdorfer, I think her name is,
Yes.
who's associated with the Lawyers for Israel front group, who was apparently haranguing Charlie Kirk at the famous meeting with Bill Ackman on Long Island only last month for straying off the reservation. So these things are all very much linked together, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think these groups are, and there's many of them. And I think, Professor Miller's done a great job in kind of identifying these groups. But, and I think, again, I'm probably one of the so-called bad Muslims. You won't find me, being feted because I'm independent. And I think, what we have is they've realized that they need to target the Muslim community because actually, Islamically, and I'm very critical of the Muslim response to what's happened in Gaza. Because whilst I think, yes, absolutely, everyone should be talking about Palestine, it should be talking about, the Holocaust that's been orchestrated against the Palestinians. It's, there is a particular duty in Islam to talk up, particularly when you see such heinous crimes being committed. And yet we've got silence from the Arab regimes. We've got silence from the likes of, Pakistan, which is a nuclear power, and it's got a very good air force, and it's completely, and I think what it demonstrates is an occupation as well. So they are occupied, and there's no doubt about that. And then you have the occupation within the UK. And again, that's going to be another anti-Semitic trope. But I'm kind of beyond caring because actually I think that, what I'm saying is not wrong, it's not untrue, it's not false. And I think we've got to get beyond feelings of the Jewish community. I was talking about Ellen Creasles, and it's like, or the Jewish community does not feel safe. For me, it's the Jewish patients don't feel safe. And I think, number one, I think I was my responsibility. I'm saying what's true. I haven't attacked or harmed anyone. But I think Jewish people, and I think the anti-Zionist Jewish community, the ones who define themselves as anti-Jewish, they need to speak up. And they can lecture me, the anti-Zionist Jews, they don't need to lecture me about how I speak because my speech has been legal and it's legitimate. I think they need to actually deal with the extremism within the Jewish community. Now, this is actually a fair point. If 80 to 90% of the Muslim community, let's just take it hypothetically and say ISIS and Al-Qaeda were Muslim-fronted organizations, okay, and there were definitely Muslim elements within them in the sense that Muslim people joined them. I don't dispute that. But let's just say if 80 to 90% of the Muslim community in the UK supported Al-Qaeda or supported ISIL, I mean, rightfully, there would be huge concern and something would be done. And yet, actually, the Muslim community had prevent forced upon it. And basically, so anyone speaking out against the wars would be a target for prevent, which is actually what's made Muslims, I think, very timid in the UK because it's the one thing people mention. But I think my kind of approach to that is that that I think there's a greater judgment to fear than that of the British state. And the anti-Zionist Jewish community isn't doing that. It's not going into the synagogues. It's not going into Jewish communities and actually and actually dealing with where the extremism is rooted. Because how is it that 70 to 90% of British Jewry are Zionist still, even when they are seeing children being sniped in the head and the heart? I mean, that's a serious problem. And I think that for them to still pledge allegiance to a foreign entity, it should be a problem for the UK because these are some of these individuals will go and join the Israeli occupation forces and then they come back to the UK with no there's no accountability for what they've done, and we've seen, we have seen with our own eyes about what the crimes that they've committed, and yet there's no accountability. And I think that's what the anti-Zionist Jewish community should be doing. It should be dealing with the extremism, and I think until they do that, and rather than attack people like me and Rahmi and saying we're anti-Semitic.
Yes, you make a very good point. But it's not just the anti-Zionist Jewish community, which is increasing in number, particularly among young people in the United States, in particular. Some of the most vociferous critics of Zionism are Jewish people like Max Blumenthal and his colleague Aaron Mate at the Grey Zone, and numerous others I could mention, Benjamin, etc.
Can I just comment on? Can I just comment on that, though, Basil? Because Aaron Mate, I saw a video and he said, well, there was no such, there's no bigger crime than the Holocaust TM. And I think he said that on the Piers Morgan show, and I remember seeing a clip of that. Okay, and I am just so sick of basically hearing about the Holocaust TM. I don't, like, this was an event that happened before I was born, allegedly happened before I was born, and right now we're seeing a live streamed event, and I don't think, quite personally, I don't think there's any comparison to what we're seeing live streamed. I don't think the Nazis, National Socialists, were shooting and sniping kids in the heart and leg, in the heart and the head for fun. I don't think
in the testicles, and according to Professor Maynard, in the testicles.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, and laughing and the rape and I think, seeing pictures, and actually, these, hundreds of thousands of, where was the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of Germans on, okay, there weren't Telegram chats then, but where were they basically laughing at when they would see bodies, being hanging up from buildings, with limbs basically, cut off, like blown off basically. I mean, these are, and it's constantly this reference back to the Holocaust TM, as I call it. There doesn't need to be this constant reference. This is almost a unique crime, I think, in history that we're seeing live streamed. The figures are probably about 680,000 Palestinians being killed. That's what 25% of the population of Gaza. 45% will at least be at least 45% of children, because it's likely to be more, because children are more likely to be susceptible to any injuries they sustain. They're going to be more susceptible to starvation. And this is happening live streamed. And what we have is this constant references to, the Holocaust and, survivors of Holocaust. I think actually they need to deal with the fact this is being done in the name of the Jewish state. You can't on one hand, it's been done in the names of the Jewish state. I mean,
I was going to say, Benjamin Netanyahu keeps going on about the world's only Jewish state all the time. But as soon as a Gentile uses the J word, even just using that term is anti-Semitic, isn't it? It's sort of like, they're allowed to refer to it as. Go on.
Yeah, I talk about the Jewish taboo. I think it is a term, and E. Michael Jones has used it a lot, and I've seen it. Like, basically, if you win a Nobel Prize and you're Jewish, it's okay to mention the word Jewish. You can say someone is Jew, but if actually a crime is being done, then you can't say that person is Jewish at all. And then, so my take on this is that why is it so wrong to say someone is Jewish? Can crimes not be committed by Jewish people? Well, they can be. Can a Jewish person not be criticized? Well, of course they can be, because you can criticize anyone else, whether it's a white person or a brown person or a Chinese person or a Pakistani. No one has any issue with, say, talking about Christians or, Catholics when they were talking about, the sexual abuse in churches, or Muslims, for example. So, they're getting an extra privilege, and people, I think, are beginning to see it, but are still reluctant to use the word. And I think actually we need to use the word because it is being committed by Jewish people. By far, the Israelis committing these crimes, yes, there are Druze elements in it. There are some foreign ethnicities within the Israeli occupation forces, but the vast majority are going to be Jewish, and they are and I think importantly, they are inciting sections of the Old Testament and sections of the Talmud when they are committing these crimes. And they are saying that, this is like, the kill all Amalek. It doesn't come from some Zionist doctrine. It didn't come, it's come from the Old Testament. And I think the sooner we kind of accept that, and the sooner we talk about something more honestly, I think the sooner we can solve the problem, rather than basically constantly be reluctant or be fearful of the backlash. There's going to be a backlash, but I think the more people that do it, it doesn't work. It's working, or it's worked because they're picking us off one by one. It's this doctor is an anti-Semite, the other doctor is an anti-Semite, and obviously the group is not, and people are not willing to put their head above the parapet. At some point, they will come for all of us. I believe. I think that these powers are not going to stop, because at some point they will find a view that's objectionable. And right now, it's the Holocaust that's objectionable. But what will it be next? And I think that this level of power cannot be exerted by any group. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable position to take.
Dr.Rehiana Ali, thank you so much for joining me today on Ascending Order.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Basil.
I'm Basil Valentine. I'll be back at the same time tomorrow with my good friend and sparring partner, Pelly Niroth-Taylor, to break down the Trump visit to Britain, and are we indeed on the brink of World War III in Eastern Europe? Have a great day, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again very soon.